know, that is right. I have been called many things, and it's funny trying to describe a person in just a couple of ways. And you know, I've been called everything from a hunter, gatherer, gardener, a grower, a producer, a cook, a butcher, a chef. That was a mistake. A photographer, a writer, an author, a protagonist, an activist, a philosopher, and a dickhead. Now, I don't believe that any of these things are actually what define us. And for me, what defines any human, really, is a person's actions, what they do, and what their story is. And my story starts at the end of the Cold War era. Yes, I am that bloody old. I have a grey beard. Ronald Reagan was the President of the United States, and Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet was the top-selling album of the year. God, I loved denim back then. Anyway, I was 10 years old and my parents decided to leave the city of Melbourne and buy a farm out in the country. Now, they were either very, very early adopters of the tree change movement, or they were bloody lazy hippies, very belated in the idea of escaping the madness of modern living. Anyway, they bought this beautiful farm, and it's not, you know, dissimilar, not too different to where we are now. You know, beautiful rolling hills and very fertile soils, high rainfall, and it was a beautiful valley farm. And the farm sat at the foothills of the Alpine high country, and the snow-peaked mountains were always there, keeping an eye on us, making sure we didn't get into too much trouble. But this place, for me, is very important, and I didn't realise at the time, but there was a river that ran between our farm and a shitload of bushland. And I'm talking like thousands of acres of state forest, so anybody can go in there. But it wasn't the bush that was so important for me, it was the river, and that river taught me everything. Locals would say it was a very, very insignificant river, but to me it was everything. It was very significant. It taught me how to be brave, how to have a spirit of adventure, how to kill. That's a very important one for all of us, because we are, most of us, killers. It taught me a lot of practical skills. I used to catch trout and blackfish and eel. For anybody that does know me personally, they're going to laugh when I say this. It taught me patience, that river. I'm a very impatient person and I'm an extremely intolerant person. But fishing for these trout taught me a lot of patience, and I would sit at the end of a fishing line as a kid for hours on end waiting for that bite to happen. Mum would be yelling at me from the farmhouse saying, "Come and have dinner," you know, and her voice would get louder and louder and louder, "Come and have dinner." And when I did catch that fish, we'd cook it very, very simply with, you know, squeeze a lemon, a bit of salt and pepper, whack it in a bit of alfoil and pop it in the oven. And I'd sit there with a fork and I'd pick it and it was, you know, absolutely delicious. But something more enjoyable than that was these guys. And this is a freshwater crayfish, you know, an amazing beast. And on Saturdays, I do all my chores. It would be really good if I could just draw a beard on that. I reckon that'd look pretty interesting. I do all my chores on Saturday, and on Saturday afternoon I would go set some cray lines in the river. Now, cray lines, it may sound a little bit fancy, but really it was mum's stockings filled with a bit of rotting meat, tied to a bit of string, and then fastened to the bank of the river. On Sunday mornings, very early in the morning when the mist was still low in the valley, I would go out with a box of matches, a billy. Does anyone know what a billy is? Like a tin with, I don't know, like a kettle without a lid, and a landing net. So 3 tools. And I'll go out to the river and I'd check the lines. If there was any weight on the line, there'd probably be a crayfish there. So what I'd tend to do is put the landing net behind where I thought the crayfish might be, tug at it, and what's the initial response of the crayfish is to go backwards to escape, straight into the landing net. Breakfast. I would use the box of matches to start a little campfire, and I'd scoop some water out of the river, boil that water, pop this tasty little bugger in there, and then sit there like an absolute wild monster, breaking it apart, eating crayfish for breakfast. It's a 10-year-old. Okay. Now, it wasn't just the river that, gave me a lot of food. We got a lot of tucker off the, in the paddocks. In autumn, I'd get field mushrooms and horse mushrooms. At summertime, I'd pick berries, like I'm talking buckets of berries. And Mum would make jams and preserves, and we'd pick them in summer and eat the jams in winter on toast. I just remember, blackberry seeds in my mouth for months and months and months of the year. We had a chook shed. We had plenty of eggs. We were actually a functional farm, so we had Hereford cattle, and some were for market and some were for the refrigerator. And we had a veggie garden. Mum was a keen gardener. She still is to this day. And this is where I learnt really, really important basics of food production. Now, I'm not a producer of food in a commercial sense. I just produce food for my family. And this is my mum giving me, a handful of bean seeds and saying to me, Ro, okay, this is how deep you plant the seeds. This is how far apart you plant them. Go to work. And I'd whack them in the ground and then wait a week or two for them to germinate. Okay, they germinate, then they grow a little bit bigger, and then they'd eventually flower. The flowers would turn into beans. We'd harvest some of the beans to eat, and then we'd leave some of the seeds for next year. The basics of food production, right there. It was a gift. I didn't realise at the time, but it was an absolute gift from my mother. Soil, seed, sunlight, water, and a bit of love, and you've got food. And that was an amazing lesson to be taught. Now, I also did a little bit of hunting, not much, but I did have a couple of hunting experiences. And they weren't necessarily, they were great life experiences, but not life experiences that taught me necessarily the skills of hunting. It was a life experience in observing human behaviour and identifying what is and isn't a dickhead. I had an older neighbour, I can't remember his name, but he asked me if I'd like to go hunting rabbits with him. And I was a young kid, and I was thinking, oh, guns is fantastic, huge Clint Eastwood fan. So we went on a couple of little hunting trips, and I'm just talking roaming the paddocks looking for rabbits. And this guy, frustrated at not shooting a rabbit, we would then walk into the bush, and he would spotlight a possum. Does anyone know what a possum is? It's like a massive squirrel, and they're so inquisitive. They just sit there on the tree with the spotlight in their eyes. They're actually like dumbfounded. What is happening down there, And he would get the .22, bang, blow it out of the sky. Bang, land on the ground. He'd go over to it, kick it, make sure it was dead. And if it wasn't dead, he'd put another round into it. I could not understand the concept of killing and taking a life for the sake of killing. It made no sense to me. This turkey, I shall call him a turkey, he did the same thing with eels, okay? So eels, do you have freshwater eels here? Yep, okay. Eels are an amazing creature, but he didn't like them because they were slimy and they were snake-like. So when he caught one when he was fishing, he would just hang it over the nearest barbed wire fence. All right, and these animals have an amazing way of surviving outside of water because that's part of their ecology. They actually move outside in the long grass to get over barriers over river because they need to get up to the upstream. I'd find the eel a couple of days later hanging on the fence, a little bit ripped, and they twirl and tangle themselves up. It'd be slightly almost dead, and I'd whack it back in the water. Now, most of them probably ended up as food for these guys. But some of them may have survived. But it was an amazing introduction for me to see how humans have an absolute power to be destructive. And life is so important that I think, even though as a meat eater myself, I developed some sort of understanding that it's not our right to take that life. Okay, so fast forward a little bit, and I'm starting high school in the country. I wasn't very good. I was interested in girls and motorbikes. So my grades were horrible. I had 2 girlfriends at once. It was awesome. And so my parents shipped me off to school in Melbourne, and I went to a Catholic boys' college. It wasn't the richest school, but there were no girls, which is very, very disappointing. And it was quite a culture shock because I'd come from the country, so I was bullied a lot. And so that got me, I had to fight my way out of a lot of situations, and that's kind of built my character today, is that I'm very protective, extremely protective, and I'm a bit of a fighter. And it did get me into trouble quite a lot. And I do not recommend for any children that are in the audience to fight your way out of bullying situations. Just go to your teacher or talk to your parents. Although, saying that, if a swift punch to the guts or kick in the balls will drop a man to his knees. Just saying. Okay, now, I was very fortunate. Here I was struggling at school, and I was struggling because I didn't fit in. And I think there's a lot of stories about people this weekend that don't fit in. But I was very fortunate that Mum and Dad kept the farm in the country. So on weekends, I'd go back to the country farm. Sounds rather proper, doesn't it? And then during the week, I'd stay in the city. Now, I saw two very distinct worlds. I was a young teenager, and there was two very distinct worlds that I could see. One was the fast-paced, consumer-driven, absolutely mad, noisy, visual rubbish, noise pollution. And to me, I could see that world. It was a man-made world. And I had these little moments of, maybe it was anxiety, where I had a realisation that if the plug was pulled, if the water didn't come out the taps, if there was no food in the supermarket, if there was no petrol at the petrol station, the whole fucking thing would fall down. It would. It was so fragile. When I went back to the country, I'd walk through the bush and I'd be catching these crayfish and I'd look up at the forest. That forest was there before Europeans settled Australia. It was there before Aboriginals, 40,000, 80,000 years ago. This stuff is so solid. It doesn't need us. We're like just a part of it. Having that realisation as a young kid it got me into, becoming a hippie. I may have grown my hair long and burned a little bit of incense, but I started started becoming active. I'm always a bit of a guy that just doesn't talk about stuff, I just go do it. And so I joined this group where we built paths, wheelchair access paths in state parks, so that people with wheelchairs could go and experience the beauty of the bush. That I maintained hiking tracks and did all that kind of stuff. I also joined this group called the Australian Conservation Foundation. I started reading a lot of environmental literature and getting really caught up in it. And I was very aware of the environmental problems that we're having. And there was one that was just down the road from our farm, which was old growth forest being harvested to make 3-ply deluxe dunny paper. Old growth forest. And here was this species of possum, that leadbeater's possum, and that was their habitat, and that was being destroyed so we could wipe our asses with their houses. This angered me so much, and I know that there was people out there that were protesting and saying, they were picketing the line and protesting. They weren't doing enough in my mind. So I came up with a brilliant idea. On the weekends, the guys would leave their tractors and their bulldozers and their chainsaws in sheds out in the logging coops. I came up with an idea of riding in on horseback with a load of TNT, right? You see where I'm going here? Blow the shit up. I told you, I'm a big fan of Clint Eastwood. He's always lighting TNT with a cigar and chucking it at things. Fortunately for me, I didn't have access to TNT, nor did I own a horse. So I had to look at less criminal activity. So it was at this time I fell in love with biology at school. So much so, it was genetics, mind you, really, really hard stuff. And I fell in love with it. And I was such a nerd, I went to the 6 o'clock in the morning extra class that the teacher offered just so that I could really nerd it up in genetics. I won this is the official title, was the Biology Nerd of the Year award at school, which absolutely freaked my parents out on the awards night. I didn't even know it was happening. And my parents were like, we thought you were totally crap at this. But I was actually quite good at it. Okay, but when it came time for me to pick a university course, I wanted to pick this thing called Environmental Sciences at Melbourne University. It was a great course, but the government had just sacked 2/3 of the environment sector at that time, so that career was gone. So with a bit of parental nudge, I went and studied computer sciences. Sorry guys, I am one of those people. I'm a computer science nerd. Now, I did that, and that really didn't do me any good. But it did land me somehow in the buying office of Australia's largest retail group. They own everything: department stores, supermarkets, pharmacies, liquor stores, car insurance, petrol stations. They own everything. And I worked in the buying office of one of their major retail chains. And I loved it. I had the suits, I had the company cars. I loved the money. I loved getting the better job. I loved the power. I loved my position. I got sucked into that life like a Star Wars tractor beam. But after a couple of years, I started to think, oh, this is a little bit shallow. It's not really making any sense. And I started getting a little bit fidgety. And so I packed up. I had this crappy old 1971 Valiant, and I packed it up and I headed to basically anywhere in Australia. 4 weeks of just flat out driving. Now, does anyone know how big Australia is? So that is a lot. There is a lot of lost highway out there. There's no speed limits, so it's just awesome. And I drove for 4 weeks straight, basically, and I had a lot of time to think. I had a lot of desert country. There is not much out there, and I had time to play a lot of Bob Dylan. Now, so by the time I got back to the cubicle, I was a different bloke. I was a completely different person. And I really struggled. I looked at everybody. I looked at what everyone was wanting to achieve. I looked at what we were doing, what we were buying. We were making stuff in China to sell to Australia. It was shit people didn't need. We were trying to tell them that they needed it so that we could make money and our shareholders could live in bigger houses. And it just pissed me off. So I thought I'll go change my job. So I went and worked for a record company. A couple of years down the track, same thing. I saw a massive amount of inequality. The company retrenched a whole bunch of my friends and then spent $100,000 on a corporate box at the MCG. And that frustrated me. It frustrated me so much that I walked into the CEO's office and I said, look, I can't do this anymore. And so the bloody security guard escorted me out of the office, and that was it. That was my last corporate-y job. And I remember standing at the front of the building in Melbourne, and I just refused to look back. I refused to look behind me because everything was in front of me. I didn't know what was in front of me. And then by the time I hopped on the train back home to tell my wife, then I said, fuck, what have I done? But anyway, I was free. So I convinced my wife that we should sell a house in the city, move to the country, and I should study that university course that was now called Natural Resource Management and finally do some good for the world. So I did that, studied that course, and in that course I learned a lot about how natural resources are utilised for our benefit. I also learned about the bad side effects, the environmental implications of agriculture and agricultural chemicals that make our food. Everything's done on a large scale. Everything requires diesel, it was an enlightening experience studying that, but it was also a depressing experience. Anyway, I ended up getting a job at a government environment agency called the Department of Sustainability and Environment, and I worked there for 7 years. And by this stage, I had a couple of kids. We had a house mortgage. I was, like most of us, busy with a little family, financially overcommitted. So to pick up the shortfall, I started to become a wedding photographer on Saturdays. Anyway, so, idiot. Okay, so I was working so hard and so frigging stressed out that I drank. I drank and I drank and I drank. Like a lot of drinking. Can I say drinking again? Alcohol, a lot of drinking. I smoked. I ate shit food. I didn't exercise. And after a while, my anxiety and panic attacks became so damn severe, I ended up in emergency wards, and quite often paramedics would be called to the office that I worked at, which was extremely embarrassing. And I got to the stage where I walked into my GP and I said, I need to do give me an overview, what's wrong with me? And, the outset was I had hypertension, high blood pressure, anxiety, depression, I was clinically obese, and I was just a mess. My GP, who's a great GP, said to me, Ro, you are ready for an early departure. You've got two choices. I'm going to give you a Band-Aid now, which is medication for problem A, problem B. You've got a choice. You can take the medication, hope for the best, or you can go change your life. So I changed my life. I started looking at the things in my life that were contributing to my ill health, because everything I'd done was me. I had done it to myself. No one else had forced me to light up that cigarette, to drink those 3 bottles of wine, to eat that McDonald's, that KFC, that supermarket food. No one had done that except for myself. So I had to identify those things and then make significant changes in my life. And one of the big things was food. So I started asking my food questions. First, it was the simple stuff like salt, how much salt you got in it, sugar, fat content. Then I got a little bit more in depth and I started looking at the science behind it. The science that is in the food that we are eating is phenomenally scary. Sulfites, phosphates, agricultural pesticides, herbicides. We're talking about, does anybody know much about agricultural antibiotics used in poultry, and the pig industry? I mean, this stuff is scary stuff. And I started researching it more and more and more, and I got so involved in this. And then I started looking at the ethics of food. How are the animals treated? I mean, the poultry industry in Australia, they were just totally busted the other day. There was a newspaper article. They were planning to kill millions of birds and bury them because they wanted to control the prices of the eggs. They had an over amount of eggs, so they thought, well, fuck it, let's kill a couple of chickens. I'm talking millions of chickens that we as humans demand to be raised and brought into this world. We're going to be killed. I also looked at the environmental implications of food packaging. Unbelievable. The amount of energy required to package our food, to transport our food. We get garlic from Mexico in Australia. We get asparagus from Peru. Can you believe that in Australia? Arse end of the world, and we're getting asparagus from Peru. This stuff was so depressing. Very, very depressing. But I did collate a lot of information. And here it is to show you my data. Now, as you can see here, this is real medical data, okay? Now, I know there's been a lot of complex graphs today. This is the one that you should be looking at. Now, up here we have the percentage of crap food, which is this line here. And since the mid-1940s, food production changed a lot. And this is to now, present day, okay? Now, so this is the increase of shitness of food, okay? Is that clear to everyone? This dot here is the shitness of our health. Me, Rohan Anderson, shit health. So that's me going up the top there, right? Now, if you read these, I don't know if anyone can read these here, but these are some of the problems that shit food causes, okay? Obesity, asthma, ADHD, diabetes, boringness, cancer, stupidity, allergies, heart disease, blindness, hypertension, anxiety and depression. Okay, very important. So that data I'd collected made me want to change. And so I started doing what any good bearded hipster would do, and I went straight to the nearest farmer's market looking for organic, free-range artisan produce. Now, this was a little bit pricey, and the range wasn't there, and it wasn't always there. If I hadn't bought well on the weekend farmer's market with my soy latte in my hand, I wanted something a little bit more reliable. So I hired a jackhammer and jackhammered the concrete from my backyard in my rural city house and started growing vegetables. Loads of vegetables. Like one year, I got 22 kilos of tomatoes from a vegetable garden. It is probably about from here to those speakers. 22 kilos of tomatoes. I proved what could be done in urban backyards, just to myself. Frustrated with the poultry industry, I looked at an alternative, and that was rabbits. And I thank you very much, England, for the gift of rabbits to Australia. Some call them a pest in Australia. I'm quite happy. I think they're quite an asset. They taste like chicken. You can hunt them all year round. What's the other bit? Oh, they're free and they're local. They're just down the road. So here I am. Hips are tick, tick, tick. Anyway, so I need to learn how to hunt. I'd had those bad hunting experiences I talked about before. So off I go to the police station, book in for the rifle course, get my licence, get a gun. Here I am with a 22 Magnum with a 12 by sight. I'll go out to a farm that I've got approval to go shoot some animals. I'm looking down, I'm leaning against a tree and I'm looking down the sight and I'm staring at this damn rabbit. I got the crosshairs on him for 20 minutes, just looking at it going, do I shoot it? What if I shoot it and I miss? and then it's going to be a painful death. And then I'm like, I'm just as bad as the other guys. Talking to myself for 20 minutes was infuriating, and then eventually, bang, bang! Dead, on the ground, couple of wriggles, walk over to it, put the shoulder over there like, James Dean in that picture, Big, and he's got the rifle over there, and I'm standing like this. Oh, that's pretty good. And I look down at the rabbit, I'm like, oh, fuck. Now what do I do? I can't eat it like that, still got the fur on it. I had no idea how to skin a rabbit, gut a rabbit, cook a rabbit. So I've had to learn all these skills. In the process of learning all these skills, I've documented on this blog called Whole Larder Love, which is right there. That's what it looks like. Okay, and I use a mixture of shitty messages, shitty opinions, and humour to communicate my story to people. And what that is basically a journey. It's going to be a lifelong journey because I am no expert in what I'm doing. I am definitely a student. Anyway, somehow some publishing house in Brooklyn said, we love your blog. That's such a shit accent. But I'll persevere. Could you please write us a book? And so I wrote this book, Whole Larder Love, which ended up being on Amazon's top 10 cookbooks of 2012, which is a very, very random thing because I'm not a writer nor am I, a qualified cook, but this book seemed to do okay. Now, but writing the book, the whole process of writing a book, if anybody has, there's a couple of authors in here, it's a pretty time-intensive process. So I was working 6 days a week, 5 days in the office at the government agency, 1 day a week as a wedding photographer, and then I was writing this book. And that was when the next life challenge presented itself, and that was the end of my marriage. Now, no good marriage ends in divorce. That's definitely clear. And we're best friends. We do love each other in a way, but we just don't love each other anymore. Okay, so that marriage ended. I was in my mid-30s, and I was single. I had access to my kids. I'd given the house to my ex-wife, and I was starting from fresh. Thankfully, and what I had with me though, I was quite comfortable. What I had with me, I had some guns and some fishing rods, some camping gear, and some cooking gear, and I was quite happy that it all could fit in the back of my truck. And my life was simplified. It was fantastic. I met somebody else whose life had simplified, and that's very important to me. He was another person, mid-30s, divorced, a couple of kids. The only difference between her and me, she had boobs and a vagina, which I was very attracted to. And so we got together. She's got a couple of kids. I got a couple of kids. And we are a Brady bunch. Eventually we move up to a country, an old farmhouse in the highlands of central Victoria. And here I was really free to really up the scale of what I was doing. I made a bigger vegetable garden, I built a chook shed, I made a smokehouse, I made a polytunnel. I got some mates with a pig farm, so I got some pigs over at their place. I make my own chorizo, bacon, pancetta, jamon. We pick, we forage. Fucking hipsters, ruined it for me. We pick mushrooms in autumn, berries in summer. We do a lot of the stuff that I did as a kid. And, it's a beautiful, beautiful lifestyle. Now, it's something I want to share with you. It's quite embarrassing here, but I did talk about my weight problem. This is very important because, I have to be honest here. I was a fatty. And so in getting this place set up, really allowed me to be more active in what I was doing, and I'd up the scale. So this is me beforehand. Really, it's quite a number of years ago actually, but that's me with my dad. And being out in this farmhouse, I really was able to eat better food and do a lot more exercise. And the results, I think, speak for themselves. I am a little bit flabby around in that area though, but apart from that, I'm looking pretty good. But in all seriousness, doing what I'm doing now, food has been responsible for changing my view of the world. And I'm not obsessing about it, but I'm just trying to communicate that view of the world is about consuming less, being more deliberate in our choices of consuming. I used to own 25 pairs of shoes. Now I own 5 pairs of shoes. They're all well-made shoes. They're made by companies that give a shit about their staff, where they source their materials, and the quality of their shoes. You know, but I look at everything in that way now. We threw away our television, we donated it, sorry, television, microwave, electric kettle, electric stove, a whole lot of that crap that we don't need in our lives. We think we need it, people are telling us we need it, but you know what it's doing? It's just killing the planet. And we are the people that have the most powerful voice and the most powerful influence. And you know where that influence is? It's in our arse. It's our wallets. Our dollars and our pounds. That's where we can influence some massive change. But the most beautiful thing about this story is that even though I'm looking down the barrel of being 40 years old very soon, I have returned to that boy, the 10-year-old boy on the river, having a relationship with nature, eating wild food, growing vegetables. And you know what people say to me, Rohan? Oh, I wish I could live off the land like you. You know what? You all live off the land. The only difference is some of us have a stronger connection, a stronger relationship with the land. And I think it's very important that people like Fergus are there. They are a platform for us to get better connected. We need to have a relationship with nature, because as soon as we have that, we'll make better choices about what we consume. Thank you very much.